I stood outside the office door and heard my husband say my wife still did not know I had filed for divorce. I looked at his female secretary smiling smugly. I did not throw a jealous fit but quietly locked down my 59% company shares. The next day, the entire company witnessed a terrifying unmasking. I returned to New York City a day earlier than scheduled. The business trip in Chicago had concluded favorably and ahead of time. I was supposed to stay an extra evening to have dinner with our partners. But for some reason, I felt a restless urge in my heart that afternoon. Perhaps it was because next week marked the 10-year wedding anniversary for Michael Carter and me. 10 years is not a lifetime, but it is long enough for a woman to place her youth, her trust, and her very flesh and blood into the hands of a man. My name is Anna Parker. I am 36 years old and the chairwoman of the board of Parker Holdings. People looking from the outside often said I was lucky to have such a talented, elegant husband who knew how to run a company and always stood by his wife at major corporate galas. They did not know the truth. 10 years ago, Parker Holdings was just a 400 square foot leased office tucked away in a small Brooklyn alley. I sold the house my mother left me, gathered every penny of my savings, and took out bank loans to build this company from nothing. Meanwhile, Michael was just an unemployed sales manager back then. He would hold me in our sweltering, unair-conditioned apartment and say he would never betray me. He begged me to trust him just once, promising to give me a lifetime of peace in return. I believed him. I believed him so much that when the company grew, I stepped aside and gave him the title of Chief Executive Officer so he could hold his head high around both our families. I believed him so much that I transferred a portion of my own shares to him. I did this simply because he once sadly mentioned that everyone at the company called me the founder, while he felt like a man riding his wife's coattails. I trusted him to the point that for years I carried the hardest meetings, the heaviest loans, and the most painful client rejections, just so he could show up at signing ceremonies with a flawless smile and an expensive custom suit. That afternoon, I pulled my small suitcase out of JFK Airport. Inside my bag was a box of artisanal fudge he had once said was his favorite during our first anniversary trip to Martha's Vineyard. I did not tell him I was coming home. I wanted to see the surprise in his eyes and hear him playfully scold me for not calling him to pick me up. I thought I would open the CEO's office door, place the box of fudge on his desk, hug him from behind, and tell him the contract was signed. This year, the company could relieve a massive financial burden. I thought we could still grow old together, even though in recent years he had become busier and colder. Our shared dinners had become less frequent, and his phone calls had grown shorter. But some doors are not meant to be opened to joy. Some doors only need to be cracked open a fraction of an inch to collapse a lifetime of trust. I arrived at the Parker Holdings headquarters on Wall Street at nearly 7 p.m. The office building was still brightly lit. The glass windows reflected the city lights turning on below. When the receptionist saw me, she startled and jumped to her feet. She told me she thought I was coming back tomorrow. I smiled and waved my hand to signal her not to announce my arrival. I told her I came back early. I asked if Michael was still upstairs. She confirmed he was. She said Mr. Carter and Chloe Smith were still in the CEO's office. Hearing the name Chloe, I paused slightly. She was Michael's personal secretary who joined the company 3 years ago. She was young, beautiful, and tactful. She always wore perfectly fitted white blouses and spoke in a voice as soft as water. I did not like her, but I had never given her a hard time. I always told myself that a female business owner should not be petty toward her husband's secretary. I told myself that trust was the absolute minimum requirement left in a marriage. I took the elevator to the 26th floor. The hallway had thick carpets, so the sound of my high heels practically dissolved into the air. The closer I got to the CEO's office, the more I heard soft laughter echoing out. The door was not completely closed. It was left ajar by just a crack. I raised my hand to knock, but my hand stopped in midair. Through the narrow gap, I saw Michael standing next to his desk. The top 2 buttons of his dress shirt were undone, and the fabric was pulled messily to one side. Chloe stood intimately close in front of him, her head bowed slightly, her pale hands slowly adjusting his belt. The movement was too natural, too intimate, too familiar. It looked as though it had been repeated countless times. I stood dead in my tracks. In that moment, I did not hear the hum of the air conditioning, the traffic from the city below, or even my own heartbeat. I only saw Michael's lips curve upward. His voice dropped low, lazy, and satisfied. He asked her if she was done yet, adding that if she was this slow, someone might walk in. Chloe laughed, her voice whiny and flirtatious. She asked if he was still afraid of people seeing them, teasing that CEO Carter was not afraid just a moment ago. I thought I had reached the absolute limit of my pain. But Michael's next sentence was the true knife plunged straight into my chest. He leaned close to her ear and spoke very softly, but the hallway was dead silent. Every word pierced my ears as clearly as shattering glass. He told her not to worry, saying his wife still did not know he had already finalized the divorce papers. He chuckled, saying she still thought she was the official, legally recognized Mrs. Carter. The box of fudge in my hand almost slipped to the floor. Divorce papers. He and I had never been to court. I had never signed any divorce petition. Under American law, no one can quietly divorce a living, legally competent spouse without them being served or appearing before a judge. So what were these divorce papers he spoke of? A forged document? A fake decree to deceive Chloe? Or some dark conspiracy he had been preparing behind my back for a long time? The blood in my veins turned to ice, drop by drop. I wanted to push the door open and storm in. I wanted to slap the face of the man I had once loved. I wanted to ask him why. Why did I sell my home to build this company with him? Why did I endure his mother's cruel insults for not having a child? Why did I overlook every time he came home late smelling of strange perfume? And yet, in the end, all I received was a sentence claiming his wife did not know a thing. But as my hand touched the doorknob, I let it go. No, I could not allow myself to become a screaming, hysterical woman in front of a mistress. Furthermore, I could not let Michael know how much I had heard. A man who had the nerve to fake his love for me for 10 years definitely did not just hide one woman in his office. Behind that elegant smile, there were undoubtedly far dirtier secrets. I took a step back, my back hitting the cold wall at the end of the corridor. I hugged the box of fudge to my chest. My nails dug so deeply into the wrapping paper that they made a tiny crinkling sound. I was terrified that if I let my guard down for even a second, all my strength would crash to the floor along with my last ounce of dignity. I turned and walked into the emergency stairwell. The heavy steel door closed behind me, shutting out the laughter from the office. The space was dark and freezing. The smell of old paint, dust, and damp metal mingled together, making me nauseous. I gripped the handrail, trying to take slow, deep breaths. Tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall. What was the point of crying? Would crying bring back 10 years? Would crying make that man feel ashamed? No. The person who deserved to be ruined was not me. I took out my phone and dialed my personal attorney. David Hayes had been with Parker Holdings since the days when the company did not even have a legal department. He understood the corporate share structure, all the agreements between Michael and me, and even the things I had hidden because I thought spouses shouldn't be too calculating. The phone rang twice before David picked up. He asked if I was already back in New York. I heard my own voice, sounding so calm it felt alien. I told David I needed him to do something for me tonight. He told me to go ahead. I said I wanted to transfer the entirety of my 59% controlling shares in Parker Holdings into the backup trust structure we had previously drafted. I told him to do it quietly and legally, making sure Michael Carter did not find out before the paperwork was finalized. The other end of the line went silent for a few seconds. He asked if I was sure. He reminded me this was the controlling stake of the company. If we triggered this protocol, Michael would have no way to use his executive authority to interfere with my equity ever again. David said he knew something must have happened. I closed my eyes. The image of Chloe's hands on my husband's belt flashed before my eyes, along with that chilling sentence. I told him he did not need to ask. He just needed to execute the order. I ordered him to send an auditor to review all corporate equity records. The third-year supplementary contract, our postnuptial agreement, and the signatory rights to all corporate accounts. I told him I wanted everything firmly in my hands by tomorrow morning. Attorney Hayes did not ask any more questions. He simply said he would handle it immediately. I hung up the phone and leaned against the wall. The box of fudge lay in my hand, its edges completely crushed. I stared at it for a long time and then laughed. It was a dry, hollow laugh, so soft it was barely a sound. My 10 years of marriage turned out to be cheaper than a box of souvenirs brought back from a business trip. I walked down the emergency stairs step by step. Each footfall echoed coldly in the pitch-black void. I was no longer the eager wife rushing home early to surprise her husband. I was also no longer the Anna Parker who believed that as long as she was good enough, patient enough, and sacrificed enough, her marriage would be peaceful. Tonight, Michael Carter could still hold Chloe in the CEO's office that I paid to lease. He could still whisper to her that his wife knew nothing. But he did not know that the woman he thought he could fool for a lifetime had stood right outside that door and heard every single word. He especially did not know that the 59% of shares he lusted after the most were silently slipping out of his grasp. I looked up through the small window in the stairwell. Outside, the city was still blazing with light. Cars were still rushing down the wet, illuminated streets. New York City has never stopped for one person's pain. Therefore, I could not stop either. Tomorrow I would return to the company, not to ask him why, but to let him know that betraying the woman who elevated him to the clouds was the most idiotic mistake of his life. The next morning, I wore the black suit that Michael once said made me look too intimidating. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at the woman in the reflection. Her eyes were slightly red, but her face held not a single trace of weakness. I barely slept last night. Attorney Hayes sent me every scanned document, every transfer confirmation, and every revoked signature authorization. By 7 a.m., my 59% equity stake had been placed into a protective mechanism that Michael could not touch. He still thought he was sitting on a throne in my company. He did not know the foundation beneath his feet had already begun to crack. I arrived at Parker Holdings at exactly 9 a.m. The receptionist saw me and scrambled to stand up. She nervously said she thought I only had meetings scheduled for today. I placed my designer bag on the counter, my voice perfectly calm. I told her no. I was here to see CEO Carter. Her face instantly went pale. I knew the entire company thought I was still in Chicago. That was highly likely. A few people had grown too accustomed to seeing Chloe enter Michael's office after hours, so when they saw me suddenly appear, they panicked even more than the guilty parties themselves. I did not ask any more questions and stepped straight into the elevator. The steel doors reflected my face, cold and unfamiliar. In the past, every time I walked into the company, I always felt like I was coming home. Today, however, I felt like an owner returning to clean up a house that had been polluted by intruders. The door to the CEO's office was closed tight. I did not knock. I pushed the door wide open. The scene before my eyes did not shock me like the night before, but it was still enough to make my stomach churn. Chloe was sitting on the armrest of Michael's chair, holding a cup of coffee right up to his lips. Michael leaned back in his chair, smiling incredibly tenderly. It was a type of smile I had not seen him give me in a very long time. Hearing the door open, they both snapped their heads around. The coffee cup in Chloe's hand jolted, spilling dark liquid all over the expensive carpet. Michael jumped up, his face drained of color. He stammered, asking why I was back. I looked at him and then glanced at Chloe. She quickly slid off the armrest, pulling her blouse straight, her lips trembling without forming a word. I walked in and placed my handbag on his desk. The sound of the leather hitting the wood echoed sharply. I asked him what the matter was. Did I need to give advance notice to return to my own company? Michael forced a smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched uncontrollably. He said he did not mean that. He was just surprised. He asked if I was tired from the trip and why I hadn't called him to pick me up. I pulled up a chair across from him and slowly crossed my legs. From this angle, I could see the nameplate reading Chief Executive Officer Michael Carter placed neatly on the desk. I had personally custom ordered that plate for him the year the company moved into this building. Back then, I thought his glory was also my glory. Now, looking at it, I just found it laughable. Chloe flinched in terror. I told her to brew me a cup of coffee. Black, no sugar, no milk. She looked at Michael, pleading for help. Michael immediately stepped forward, trying to act as a peacemaker. He said I must be tired from traveling and offered to call another assistant to do it. I raised my eyes and glared at him. I asked if my words held no weight in this company anymore. The entire room went dead silent. Michael swallowed hard. He knew very well that the calmer I was, the more severe the situation had become. Finally, he turned to Chloe and lowered his voice significantly, telling her to go make the coffee. Chloe kept her head down and walked out. But before she closed the door, I saw that her eyes held not only fear but also deep resentment. A secretary who had been pampered for too long truly started to believe she was the mistress of the house. Unfortunately for her, she walked into the wrong house. As soon as the door clicked shut, Michael immediately walked around the desk, trying to grab my hand. He begged me to listen to his explanation, claiming things were not what I thought. He said Chloe was just. I pulled my hand back before he could touch me. I said she was just a secretary so devoted that she sat on his armrest and fed him coffee. His face stiffened. He told me not to speak so harshly. He said he was a man, and out in the real world, sometimes there was social networking. I finished his sentence. Social networking to the point of filing fake divorce papers behind his wife's back. The moment those words dropped, every drop of blood vanished from Michael's face. He stared at me blankly, his eyes wide open as if someone were strangling him. In that split second, I knew I had guessed correctly. If he were truly innocent, he would have been angry. But right now, he was only terrified. He asked me who was spreading such vicious lies. I smiled. I asked him if it mattered who said it, or if it mattered whether it was true. He took a half step back, his hand unconsciously gripping the edge of the desk. He denied it, saying no such thing existed. He claimed someone was trying to destroy our marriage and begged me not to believe it. I stood up and walked over to the large glass window behind him. Below, the city was still moving in a frantic rush. I had stood right here with him on the day the company opened its new headquarters. He had put his arm around my shoulder and said that everything we had today was proof of our love. It turns out that the more beautiful the vows, the worse they reek when they rot. I turned around to look at him. I told him that tonight at 7 p.m., we were going to his mother's house. I wanted to hear her explain the divorce papers. Michael's face twisted in panic. He said that was unnecessary. He pleaded that his mother was elderly and asked me not to make her worry. I picked up my handbag and walked past him. I told him that if he did not show up, I would have my lawyer send a formal legal notice straight to her house. He stood paralyzed behind me. I did not turn back, because I knew this game had only just begun, and the person about to tremble was not going to be him alone. I left the company without looking back. In the elevator, my phone buzzed incessantly. Michael called me 3 times and then sent a text message. He begged me not to lose my temper, promising he would explain everything tonight. He swore it had nothing to do with his mother and pleaded with me not to blow things out of proportion. I stared at the words appearing on the screen. Deep down, I only felt a chilling sense of amusement. The man who once vowed to shield me from the rain and wind was now only afraid that I would drag his mother into the mud pit the two of them had dug themselves. I did not reply. I drove my car back to my private condo in Tribeca, changed into a different power suit, and reapplied my makeup lightly to cover the dark circles under my eyes. Tonight was not a family dinner. Tonight was the opening act of a trial that required no judge. At exactly 6:45 p.m., I parked my car in front of the massive mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. That 3-story estate was a gift I bought for my mother-in-law in our 3rd year of marriage. It was right after Parker Holdings signed its first major contract worth nearly $3 million. At that time, Helen Carter, Michael's mother, held my hands and cried until her eyes were completely red. She said she did not give birth to me, but I was more devoted to her than a biological daughter. I had believed those tears. I believed them so much that the deed to the estate was put in her name. I only kept an asset proxy agreement that Attorney Hayes had forced me to sign as a safety net. Back then, I had even scolded David for being too paranoid. Thinking back on it now, if not for that paranoia, the Carter family would have chewed me up and swallowed me down to the bone today. Just as I turned off the engine, Michael's car sped up behind me. He got out of the car in a rush. His dress shirt was not buttoned properly, and his face was pale with anxiety. He pleaded with me to listen to him first, saying his mother did not know much, and begged me not to agitate her. I looked at him. I asked if he was afraid she would get agitated, or afraid she would blurt out things he hadn't briefed her on yet. He pressed his lips tightly together. He reached out to pull me, but I took a step back. I ordered him not to touch me. Michael's face twitched slightly. He used to hate it when my voice got that cold, because every time it did, he knew I had made a decision and would not back down. I rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened. My mother-in-law stood inside, wearing a dark purple silk loungewear set and the pearl necklace I gave her for her birthday last year. When she saw me, a bright smile immediately bloomed on her face, but her eyes quickly darted to Michael behind me. She greeted me warmly, acting surprised that I was back. She invited me in, saying she had made traditional homemade beef stew for me. She said I must be exhausted from my business trip. I walked into the house. The rich smell of beef and herbs filled the living room. The dining table was set with all the dishes I used to love. If it were the past, I would have been touched, thinking she still remembered my preferences. But today, that attentiveness just felt like a layer of thick makeup covering a deceitful face. I dropped my handbag onto the sofa. I told her she did not need to set the table. I told her I did not come here to eat today. The smile on Helen's face froze. She asked what I was talking about. She said if a husband and wife have issues, they should talk it out slowly, rather than walking into the house with a heavy, angry face. Michael quickly intervened. He claimed I was just tired and said he would talk to me. I turned to look at him. I told him he had said enough. Now it was his mother's turn to speak. Helen slammed the bowl of stew down onto the table. The sound of porcelain hitting the glass top rang out harshly. She angrily demanded to know if I was interrogating my mother-in-law. She told me she knew I was successful and had money, but as a wife, I needed to know my place. She complained that Michael spent all day managing the company while I was constantly on business trips, leaving the house cold and empty. Furthermore, she snapped that I hadn't even managed to give this family a grandchild. She said if he was a little tired and I didn't pity him, I certainly had no right to come here and cause a scene. I stared at her for a long time. It turned out these were the words she had been holding in her heart for ages, just waiting for the chance to hurl them in my face. The fact that I lost my first child because I threw myself into saving a crucial contract for the company. The fact that the doctors said it would be very difficult for me to conceive again. The fact that I lay in the hospital for 3 days and Michael only visited for one afternoon because he was busy meeting investors. In their eyes, all of those sacrifices ultimately boiled down to one sentence. I hadn't given them a grandchild. I slowly asked her if that was the reason she let her son forge fake divorce papers behind my back. The air in the living room instantly froze solid, Helen's eyes widened, and the hand holding the serving spoon trembled slightly. Michael stood behind me, his breathing noticeably heavier. He tried to speak. I cut him off, telling him to let his mother speak. Helen looked at me and then at Michael. That single glance was enough for me to understand. Not only did she know, but she was the mastermind pushing it forward. A long moment later, she let out a scoffing laugh. She aggressively said yes, she knew. And what of it? She said since I already heard about it, she would be blunt. She stated the Carter family could not let their bloodline end. She told me that if I couldn't have kids, I needed to know my place and step aside. She argued that Michael was still young and needed a son to carry on his legacy. She accused me of hoarding the chairman title, the money, and the company, but failing to give him a real home. I felt a sharp pain in my heart, but on the outside I remained perfectly composed. I asked her who bought this house. She choked on her words. I asked her who bought the Mercedes Michael was driving. I asked her who paid for her luxury vacations to Singapore and Europe every year. I asked her who gifted her the jewelry around her neck, and I asked her who built the company that allowed her son to sit in the CEO's chair. Helen's face turned beet red. She yelled at me not to use my money to oppress people. She spitefully added that a woman with a lot of money who couldn't reproduce was useless. Michael went pale. He begged his mother to stop talking. I let out a very soft laugh. No, I told him, let her keep talking. The more she spoke, the less guilty I would feel. I opened my bag, took out my phone, dialed Attorney Hayes, and put him on speakerphone. I said, David, starting tonight, audit all the assets I placed under Helen Carter's name. This Greenwich estate, the Mercedes, the 2 trust fund accounts under her name that were funded from my personal accounts. Prepare the paperwork to repossess everything according to the asset proxy agreement. Attorney Hayes' voice rang out clearly. He said yes. The paperwork was already prepped. He assured me that once I gave the confirmation, his team would send the legal notices first thing tomorrow morning. The bowl of stew in Helen's hand crashed to the floor, shattering into pieces. Michael looked at me as if he were looking at a complete stranger. He asked if I was crazy, reminding me that she was his mother. I looked straight into his eyes, and I reminded him that I used to be his wife. The moment my words faded, the massive living room fell dead silent. Shards of porcelain lay at my mother-in-law's feet. The beef stew pooled on the polished stone floor like a stain that could never be wiped clean. Helen glared at me, her lips trembling with rage. Yet, for the first time in our 10 years as family, she could not immediately find a single word to curse me. Michael stood between me and her. His face was ghostly pale, his eyes filled with a mix of panic and fury. He begged me not to take our marital issues too far. He admitted he was wrong and said he would own up to it, but warned me that if I touched his mother, I was permanently burning the bridge between us. I looked at him and instinctively laughed. I asked him if he really thought there was a bridge left to burn after I heard him tell his secretary that his wife didn't know about the divorce. My mother-in-law immediately spun around to face Michael, her eyes as sharp as daggers. She shrieked, asking if he actually let me hear that. Just that one sentence was enough to confirm everything. I didn't need any more evidence from their mouths, but I still wanted to see how violently they would thrash before they sank. Michael gritted his teeth and told his mother to shut up. Helen looked as if she had just been slapped across the face. She screamed, asking how he dared to yell at his mother over this woman. I slowly sat down on the sofa, pulled a thin folder out of my handbag, and placed it on the coffee table. The folder was black, containing only a few sheets of paper, but I knew its weight was enough to crush all of Michael's confidence. I told him that before the two of them continued acting out their mother-son tragedy, I wanted him to look at this. Michael stared at the folder. His hands shook slightly, but he still tried to act calm. He asked what this new trick was. I told him to open it and see for himself. He picked up the file. When he saw the text on the first page, his expression changed instantly. It was the supplementary equity agreement we had signed in our 3rd year of marriage. It was the time I transferred an additional 11% of my shares to him, so he could look better in the eyes of our business partners. At the time, Attorney Hayes had insisted on a protective clause. The clause stated that if the marriage dissolved due to severe faults on his part, including adultery, document forgery, or illegal transfer of joint assets, the gifted shares would be automatically revoked. As Michael read, sweat poured down his forehead. He muttered that it was impossible, claiming he didn't remember signing this. I calmly replied that he didn't remember because he was too ecstatic about getting more shares that day. He was too busy bragging to his friends that he was no longer just an employee working for his wife. He didn't even bother to carefully read what he signed. He snapped his head up, his eyes bloodshot. He accused me of setting a trap for him. I stood up and looked him dead in the eye. I told him I was protecting myself. The only thing that trapped him was his own greed. Helen snatched the papers from her son's hands, but she couldn't fully comprehend the legal jargon and numbers. She pointed a trembling finger at my face, calling me vicious. She accused me of calculating against their family from the very beginning. I stepped closer to her, my voice low but every word crisp and clear. I told her that if I had been calculating from the start, this house would not be in her name. If I were vicious from the start, her son wouldn't have sat in the CEO's chair all these years. If I lacked even a shred of decency, I would have brought the police here tonight instead of just calling my lawyer. Suddenly, Michael lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. He begged me to listen. He claimed the fake divorce papers were his mother's idea pushing him. He swore Chloe was just a moment of weakness. He promised he never truly wanted to leave me. He stammered that he was just under pressure about the baby issue, pressured by his mother, and stressed by the company. He begged me to let him off this once. He promised to fire Chloe immediately. He promised to come home with me so we could start over. I stared at his hand gripping my wrist. That was the hand that had wiped my tears after my miscarriage. That same hand, just last night, let another woman adjust his belt in his office. I felt my stomach churn with disgust. I yanked my hand away. Start over? I asked him what exactly he was going to use to start over. The fake divorce papers? The secretary in the office? Or his mother's insults about my inability to have children? Michael looked as if he was suffocating. He stepped back, his shoulders slumped. I told him I was giving him one night. I picked up my bag. I ordered him to be at the company at 9 a.m. tomorrow to officially hand over all executive authority. If he didn't show up, I would send a suspension notice to every department, every corporate partner, and every bank dealing with Parker Holdings. My mother-in-law shrieked, asking how I dared do this to her son. I turned my head and looked at her. I told her she should worry about herself first. The repossession notice for this estate would be hand-delivered to her tomorrow morning. I walked out the door. Behind me, Michael's voice called my name, hoarse and desperate, but I did not stop. In the driveway, the night wind blew past the manicured hedges, biting cold. I looked up at the pitch-black sky. My heart was no longer trembling like it was last night. This game had started, and this time I was the one setting the rules. The next morning, I arrived at the company earlier than usual. The New York sky was just brightening. The early morning sun rays struck the glass facade of the Parker Holdings building, cold and sharp as a blade. I stood in the lobby for a few seconds, looking up at the company logo, the colors, the font, every detail I had personally chosen. For 10 years, this place was my dream, my flesh and blood, my pride. Yet, after just one night, I realized that dream had been hollowed out from the inside by the person I shared my bed with. At 10 minutes to 9, I walked into the main boardroom. Attorney Hayes was already there. Beside him sat the head of legal, the HR director, and 2 loyal board members. Everyone was silent. On the table in front of me lay the resolution suspending Michael Carter from his CEO duties, the protocol revoking his signatory rights, and a list of corporate bank accounts to be frozen immediately. I placed my hand on the stack of files. The cold paper against my palm made me feel strangely serene. At exactly 9 a.m., the boardroom doors opened. Michael walked in. He was wearing a dark navy suit I had bought for him during a trip to Chicago. His hair was neatly combed, and his face tried to project calm, but his bloodshot eyes and the dark bags under them completely betrayed him. Right behind him was Chloe. She had no business being here. But clearly, Michael wanted to use her as a shield or perhaps as one final provocation. I looked at her and stated that executive board meetings were off-limits to personal secretaries starting this morning. I ordered her out. Chloe stiffened, her red lips pressed tightly together. She defiantly said she was Mr. Carter's secretary and had a duty to take the minutes. I cut her off. I told her that from this exact moment, she was no longer the secretary to anyone in this company. The entire room fell silent. Michael slammed his hand on the table. He told me not to cross the line. He said our personal issues had nothing to do with business. I slid the suspension resolution across the table to him. I told him to read it before talking about business. He picked it up. After just a few lines, his face turned ash gray. He read aloud the words, suspension of duties, revocation of executive authority. He demanded to know what right I had to do this. I looked at him for a long time and then answered slowly. I told him I was doing it in my capacity as the founding shareholder, chairwoman of the board, and the legal controlling entity of Parker Holdings. He let out a dry, shaky laugh. He asked if I had forgotten that he also had shares. He told me he wasn't some mid-level employee I could just fire on a whim. Attorney Hayes placed another dossier on the table, his voice loud and clear. He addressed Michael, stating that according to the supplementary equity agreement signed on May 18th of that year, The gifted shares from Miss Parker to him would be revoked if severe marital misconduct occurred that caused damage to the company's interests. Hayes stated we already had preliminary evidence of an illicit affair in the workplace, misuse of company assets, and suspected fraudulent asset transfers. Michael snapped his head toward David. He yelled at him to shut up, saying he was just my lawyer and had no right to judge him. I placed my phone on the table and played the audio recording from the night before. My mother-in-law's voice echoed sharply through the boardroom. The Carter family cannot let their bloodline end. If you can't have kids, you need to know your place and step aside. Followed by Michael stammering, and Helen admitting she knew about the fake divorce papers. Michael's face shifted from white to gray. Chloe stood near the door, her eyes panicking, unsure whether to step forward or run away. I turned off the recording. I told him this was only part one. I said I didn't want to release everything yet because I wanted to save him his final shred of dignity. Michael looked at me, his voice dropping low. He asked if I really wanted to push him into a corner. I felt my throat tighten. Even now, this man still didn't understand. I told him I wasn't pushing him into a corner. He had set fire to his own bridge back. I told him to sign the handover. He gritted his teeth and asked what would happen if he refused. I looked over at the HR director and told her to send the suspension notice company-wide immediately and to notify the banks to freeze Michael Carter's authorization on all corporate accounts. Michael lunged forward and snatched the pen off the table, but not to sign. He violently threw the pen onto the floor, his eyes completely bloodshot. He yelled my name, telling me not to forget who had been entertaining clients and acting as the face of the company for the past 10 years. He arrogantly asked if I thought this company would survive a day without him. I stood up. Every word dropped as heavy as stone. I told him that without me, 10 years ago, he was still an unemployed loser. That sentence struck him like a physical blow. He froze in his tracks. Chloe stared at the ground in shame. I wasn't gloating. I just felt profound sadness. I was sad because, up until this very final moment, the thing he regretted losing wasn't me, but the throne he was about to lose. Finally, Michael signed. His hand shook so badly that his signature was completely distorted. When he put the pen down, I knew his power within Parker Holdings had officially collapsed. But right at that moment, Attorney Hayes' phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his face turning incredibly grave. He leaned close to my ear and whispered. He said the internal audit team just discovered 3 supply contracts showing signs of embezzlement. The amount was massive, potentially exceeding $1.2 million. I clenched my fists. It turned out the affair was just the dust on the surface of the table. The true rot ran much, much deeper. I looked at David. In that split second, all the background noise in the boardroom seemed to fade away. $1.2 million. That number wasn't just money. It was the sweat of hundreds of employees. It was the sleepless nights I spent reviewing contracts. It was the times I bit the bullet and paid exorbitant bank interest rates to keep our cash flow alive. And yet Michael, the man I trusted with executive power, could so casually gut my company from the inside out. I turned to look at him. He was still standing by the table, his face still showing the humiliation of signing the handover documents. But when he heard the word audit, his eyes twitched slightly. Just that microscopic movement was enough to tell me he knew about it. I slowly asked if he had anything to say before I ordered a full forensic accounting review. Michael tightened his fists, trying to act calm. He said in a large company, it was normal for contracts to have errors. He told me not to listen to a few auditors and blame him for everything. I let out a cold laugh. An error worth over $1.2 million was a very lucrative error indeed. He gritted his teeth, accusing me of suspecting him of embezzling company funds. I looked him dead in the eye. I told him it wasn't a suspicion. I was giving him one last chance to confess. Chloe, standing next to him, suddenly started to shake. She thought she was only dragged into an adultery scandal. She never expected the fire to spread to federal financial crimes. She secretly glanced at Michael, her eyes filled with sheer panic. I absorbed all of this. If a woman truly loves a man, she worries about him. But if she only loves his money, when the money is threatened, she panics for herself first. I turned to the CFO and told her to project the files onto the screen. The projector lit up. 3 material supply contracts appeared, all signed with Apex Supplies. This was a vendor Michael had constantly praised as a long-term, reliable partner with great pricing. Below each contract was a market price comparison chart showing a markup of 20 to 35%. The total inflated amount was over $1.2 million. What was even more damning was that the final payment accounts routed through 2 shell companies, one of which was registered under the name of my mother-in-law's cousin. The boardroom went ice cold. I looked at Michael and demanded an explanation. His lips moved soundlessly. He claimed he didn't handle these payments directly. He said the purchasing department did it, and he merely approved their proposals. The CFO lowered her head, her voice firm. She stated, "Mr. Carter, the system logs show you explicitly requested to bypass the pricing appraisal step on all 3 contracts. The approval emails are still there." Michael snapped his head toward the CFO. He warned her to watch her mouth and asked who gave her the right to frame him. I tapped my finger lightly on the table. I told him I did. He choked on his words. I picked up my phone and called the head of IT immediately. I ordered him to lock all network access for Michael Carter, Chloe Smith, and 3 associated employees in the purchasing department. I commanded him to back up all emails, login histories, and contract edit logs, strictly warning him that absolutely no data was to be deleted. The IT head replied instantly, confirming he was on it. Chloe suddenly took a step forward, her voice shaking violently. She claimed this had nothing to do with her. She cried that she was just a secretary, and whatever Mr. Carter told her to do, she did. Michael glared at her, screaming at her to shut up. I smirked. I asked her why she was in such a rush to wash her hands clean. I asked Miss Smith if I had even brought up the luxury condo in Tribeca registered in her name. I asked where the money for that came from. Her face turned as white as paper. Michael stood entirely paralyzed. Their reactions told me David had pursued the right angle. The condo, the car, the designer bags, the luxury vacations Chloe vaguely flaunted on social media were highly likely fed by the lifeblood of my company. I stood up, my voice dropping to an icy tone. I declared the meeting over. From this moment on, all files related to Michael Carter were being transferred to the legal department and independent auditors. No one was allowed to contact, destroy, or alter documents. Anyone caught helping to hide evidence would bear joint liability. People filed out of the boardroom one by one until only Michael remained, staring at me. Stripped of his initial arrogance, he stepped closer, his voice hoarse. He reminded me we had been married for 10 years and asked if I really wanted to send him to federal prison. I looked at the man in front of me, my heart aching with a dull pain. Not out of pity for him, but out of pity for the younger version of myself. I asked him if he remembered we were married when he used company money to fund his mistress. He fell silent. I picked up the files and walked out. The moment I reached the hallway, Attorney Hayes' phone lit up again. He read the text message, his expression growing even heavier. He told me the asset investigation team just sent more information. 2 prime retail storefronts on Madison and 5th Avenue were registered under my mother-in-law's name. The funds for those purchases also showed signs of originating from these contracts. I closed my eyes for a second and opened them. It turned out it wasn't just one person betraying me. The entire Carter family had sat at the banquet table, feasting on my hard work. I sat in my office until nearly noon. In front of me was a bank statement tracking the cash flow, so long it made my eyes blur. The cold numbers linked together like knives slicing into my self-esteem. 3 dirty contracts, 2 shell companies, 1 personal account belonging to Helen's cousin. Then ultimately, the money flowed into 2 prime retail storefronts in Manhattan. One space was leased to a high-end cosmetics brand, the other to a luxury jeweler. The total estimated value was nearly $1.6 million. That $1.6 million was no longer just on paper. It had morphed into real estate, into monthly rental income, into the European vacations and designer bags Helen flaunted to her high society friends. I asked David if we had enough grounds to freeze them. He placed another stack of documents in front of me. He explained that if we only relied on the cash flow, we would need further verification. However, Helen's cousin had signed a personal loan agreement with Michael exactly when the money was transferred. The loan had 0 interest, no repayment deadline, and was subsequently used as a down payment for the 2 storefronts. David said this was a textbook sign of fraudulent asset concealment. I let out a bitter laugh. The Carter family had literally built an entire money laundering syndicate. David remained silent for a few seconds. He then told me that if we pursued this to the end, it would no longer be a civil divorce dispute. It would become a federal white-collar criminal case. He asked if I still wanted to give Michael a chance to make restitution on his own. I looked out the glass window. Outside, dark gray clouds pressed low over the city. Over the past 10 years, I had given him too many chances, so many that he thought my forgiveness was bottomless. I said no. I wanted him to personally watch every layer of his fake skin get peeled off. That afternoon, I had my driver take me to the jewelry store on 5th Avenue. The display windows were gleaming, the gold signage screamed luxury, and wealthy customers bustled in and out. I stood across the street watching for a long time, then called Helen. She picked up very quickly, her voice still choked with rage. She demanded to know what else I wanted, yelling that I had already stripped her son of his job, and asked if I wanted to drive them to death. I calmly replied that I was standing in front of the jewelry store on 5th Avenue. I asked her if she wanted to come out and look at her assets one last time. The other end of the line went dead silent, save for heavy, ragged breathing. A moment later, she growled, asking what nonsense I was spewing. She reminded me the store was in the name of Robert, her cousin. I asked her if she forgot that the money to buy it funneled through 3 of Parker Holdings' supply contracts. I asked her if she really thought Robert would take the fall for federal wire fraud and money laundering just to protect her and her son. Helen shrieked, asking how I dared investigate her. I looked at my reflection in the window glass. I told her I wasn't investigating her. I was simply tracking down my own money. She hung up. 15 minutes later, Michael called. I stared at his name on the screen and let it ring until the very last second before answering. He demanded to know what I was doing to his mother. His voice was incredibly hoarse. He had probably just finished screaming at her. I told him I hadn't done anything yet. I just let her know those prime retail stores weren't as clean as she thought. He begged me to tell him how much I wanted, promising to pay it back, and pleaded with me to leave his mother out of it. I laughed out loud. I asked him what he was going to use to pay me back. He lost his CEO chair, and his gifted shares were about to be clawed back. I asked if he planned to sell the condo he bought for Chloe. He went completely silent. That silence was a confession in itself. I pressed further, asking if she knew where the money for that condo came from. He begged me not to touch Chloe, claiming she knew nothing. Even now, he was still defending her. My heart, which I thought was completely numb, still flared with a sharp, agonizing pain. I asked him what I knew when he took company money to fund his mistress. I asked what I knew when his mother used that money to buy real estate. I asked what I knew when he stood in front of me playing the role of a devoted husband all those years. Michael was panting heavily. He admitted he was wrong and swore he would fix it. He offered to get on his knees, offered to dump Chloe. But he warned that if I blew up the financial crimes, the company would also take a massive hit. He begged me not to destroy Parker Holdings just because I was mad at him. I gripped my phone tightly. I told him he had no right to even speak the name Parker Holdings. He was the one who started destroying it first. I hung up. Immediately after, Attorney Hayes sent a new text message. Chloe Smith had just withdrawn a large sum of cash from her personal account and booked a flight to Boston for tonight. I stared at the text, the corners of my mouth turning ice cold. The first rat had smelled the smoke and was trying to scurry out of the nest. I texted David back, instructing his team to secure all evidence related to her. Tonight, I wanted to meet Chloe before she could vanish. I didn't go to the airport immediately. I knew someone like Chloe, if preparing to flee, wouldn't just grab a few clothes. She would return to her condo first to pack up documents, cash, jewelry, and all the dirty things Michael had bought for her. I ordered the driver to head straight to the luxury condo in Tribeca. The entire building glowed in the night, looking luxurious to the point of being cold. This was a place where I had once considered buying a small unit for my own mother to retire in. But after she passed away, I no longer had the heart to walk into places that were overwhelmingly beautiful but lacked warmth. I never expected Michael would ultimately use my company's money to buy a place here for another woman. The car pulled up to the lobby. Attorney Hayes was already waiting with a legal assistant. He handed me a thin file. Unit 32B was registered under Chloe Smith. The payment transactions were linked to Michael's personal account and a wire transfer from Apex Supplies. I took the file, my fingers gripping it so tightly the paper bent. I asked if she was still up there. David confirmed his investigators saw her bring a suitcase down, but she went back up because she forgot her passport. I smirked. Perfect timing. We got into the elevator. The floor numbers ticked up slowly. Every ding felt like a hammer striking my tightly wound nerves. The elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor. The hallway featured thick carpets and warm amber lighting. It was so quiet I could distinctly hear the wheels of a suitcase rolling behind the door of the apartment at the end of the hall. I rang the doorbell. Silence hung inside for a few seconds before Chloe's highly guarded voice called out, asking who it was. I replied, Anna Parker. No answer came. But immediately after, I heard the sound of something dropping and hurried footsteps. I rang the bell again. I told her to open the door, adding that if she wanted me to call building security and the police to draft a report right here in the hallway, I had no problem doing so. The door cracked open. Chloe stood behind it, her hair tied up in a messy bun, wearing no makeup, her eyes red and puffy. She no longer possessed the sweet, soft demeanor of the pampered CEO's secretary. In front of me stood a panicked woman desperately clutching a designer handbag like a life preserver. She asked what I was doing here. I pushed the door open and walked in. She tried to block me, but upon seeing Attorney Hayes behind me, she quickly backed away. The condo was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, white leather sofas, marble coffee tables, and expensive perfumes lined up on the shelves. Everything reeked of money. My money. I looked at the two open suitcases in the middle of the living room. Inside were clothes, jewelry, documents, stacks of cash, and her passport. I asked her where she was rushing off to. Chloe bit her lip. She claimed she was going back to her hometown for a few days. She cried that she knew nothing about the company's business and begged me not to pressure her. I picked up a velvet box from the table. Inside was a diamond bracelet I had seen on her social media. I asked if Michael bought this for her. She looked down, saying she didn't ask where the money came from. I asked her if she didn't ask, or if she didn't dare to ask. She burst into tears. She sobbed, claiming she was also a victim. She said Michael told her that he and I had been separated for a long time. He told her the divorce papers were done and they were just waiting for the right time to announce it. He told her I didn't love him, and only treated him as a tool for the company. She said she felt sorry for him, which was why I glared at her coldly. I asked her if she felt sorry for him to the tune of accepting a multi-million-dollar condo, cars, designer bags, and luxury vacations. Chloe choked on her words. Her tears fell rapidly, but they did not move me in the slightest. I had cried enough for all three of us. Right at that moment, her phone rang. The screen displayed Michael's name. I looked at her and ordered her to answer it, and put it on speaker. Trembling, she hit the answer button. Michael's voice instantly blared out. He frantically asked if she had made it to the airport yet. He ordered her not to listen to a word Anna said. He told her to just fly to Boston first, and wait for him to handle everything before he joined her. He explicitly reminded her to bring the deed to the condo and not let me get my hands on it. Chloe's face went completely pale. I calmly pulled out my own phone and hit record. On the other end, Michael kept talking. He told her if anyone asked, to say she had no idea where the money came from. He said everything was a gift he voluntarily gave her. As for the contracts, he strictly ordered her to never mention the emails he told her to delete. I looked at David, and he gave a slight nod. This was more than enough. Chloe broke down completely. She wailed into the phone. Michael, Anna is right here. The line went dead silent. A few seconds later, he hung up. I placed the velvet box back on the table and looked at Chloe. I told her she had two choices. 1, she could keep protecting him and sync with him. 2, she could hand over every email, text message, bank statement, and everything she knew to my lawyer. I told her I wasn't promising to let her off the hook, but I would legally document her cooperation. She collapsed onto the floor, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. A long time later, she shakily pulled a laptop out of her suitcase and placed it in front of me. She confessed that she kept backups. She said she was afraid that one day he would abandon her, so she kept everything. I stared at the glowing screen as folders appeared before my eyes. Apex Supplies 2021, real pricing sheets, transfers to the mother, condo, text messages with Michael. Every folder name was like another nail driven into the coffin of my marriage. Chloe sat huddled on the floor, hugging her knees, her voice totally hoarse. She swore she really didn't know the money was stolen from the company at first. She claimed Michael said it was his personal bonus and his own investment profits. I didn't look at her. I said she might not have known when she first got the condo, but she knew later. She kept her head down. Her silence was her answer. I opened a text thread between her and Michael. In it, Chloe had clearly asked, "Is it safe for you to transfer this much money? If Anna finds out, we're dead." Michael had replied, "She only cares about signing the big contracts. She never pays attention to the small supply invoices." Don't worry, I read that, my palms turning icy cold. It turned out that in his eyes, my absolute trust in him was nothing more than a loophole for him to exploit. Attorney Hayes adjusted his glasses, his tone extremely serious. He stated that these emails proved Michael explicitly ordered the inflation of the contracts and told Chloe to destroy the evidence. Furthermore, there were forwarded emails to Helen Carter regarding the purchase of the 2 storefronts. I turned back to Chloe and asked what else she had. She trembled, saying that was it. I looked her dead in the eye. I told her she kept all this because she was terrified Michael would dump her. A careful woman like her wouldn't just keep a few easily accessible folders. I warned her that if she wanted to cooperate, she better not test my patience. Tears spilled from her eyes again. She crawled over to her suitcase, dug under the lining, and pulled out a makeup bag. From it, she retrieved a small black USB drive. Her hands shook so violently she almost dropped it. She confessed it was an audio recording. She said one time Michael was drunk and talking to his mother in the living room. She got scared, so she recorded them. I took the USB. David immediately plugged it into his secondary laptop. A few seconds later, Michael's voice echoed through the luxury condo he had bought for his mistress. His words were slightly slurred from alcohol, but the malicious intent was crystal clear. He said, Mom, don't worry, Anna doesn't know. I can shuffle those contracts around. Give it 2 more years. Once I siphon enough capital out, I'll leave the company as an empty shell. When we divorce, she can keep the dead carcass of the company for all I care. Helen's voice chimed in, cold and dripping with greed. What about her shares? She holds too much. I'm not comfortable with that. Michael replied, I'm figuring it out. If I can force her to sign over more executive voting rights, I can slowly dilute her. If not, just keep using her infertility to mentally break her. Women like her might act tough on the outside, but deep down they're terrified of losing their husbands. I sat completely motionless. I thought I had felt the maximum amount of pain, but it turned out there were depths of agony I hadn't reached yet. For 10 years, I wasn't just living with a cheating husband. I was sleeping next to a predator who was actively calculating the day he could bleed my company dry and toss me aside with an empty shell. He used to hold me on nights when I was so exhausted, I cried, telling me to rest, saying he was there for me. All the while, he was silently sharpening his knife behind my back. Chloe burst into loud sobs. She apologized, admitting she was wrong, but whining that she was manipulated too. She said he promised to marry her, telling her I only had the title of wife, and claiming his mother had already accepted her. I stood up and walked right up to her. I told her she wasn't manipulated by love, she was manipulated by greed. She saw that he had money, power, houses, and cars, and she thought she had won the jackpot. Now that she was losing, she wanted to call herself a victim. She sat there in stunned silence, not daring to argue. I didn't want to hear her crying anymore. I turned to Attorney Hayes and instructed him to seal all the data, send the files to the independent auditors by tomorrow morning, and draft the federal criminal complaint. As for Chloe, I told him to document her cooperation, but all assets tied to the dirty money were to be frozen. Chloe jerked her head up. She stammered about the condo. I looked around the massive room, the expensive furniture, the fake warm lighting. I asked her if she was seriously sitting in an apartment bought with my company's stolen money and asking me what was going to happen to it. She shut her mouth. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered it. A deep male voice came through the line. He asked if this was Anna Parker. He introduced himself as Tommy, Michael's former driver. He said he had a few things he wanted to hand over to me. He said if I wanted to know what my husband had been doing behind my back for the last 3 years, I needed to meet him tonight in the company's underground parking garage. I gripped my phone tightly. Another door was opening, and I knew the darkness behind this one was going to be much thicker. I left Chloe's condo close to 10 p.m. The city outside was still ablaze with neon, but inside my heart, there was only a heavy, suffocating gray. Attorney Hayes advised me to let him accompany me to the garage, but I shook my head. Some truths, no matter how filthy, I needed to see with my own eyes and hear with my own ears. I texted my private security detail to stand by close, then drove myself back to the Parker Holdings building. The underground garage was terrifyingly empty this late at night. The fluorescent lights flickered against the concrete ceiling. The ventilation fans hummed like a long, drawn-out sigh in the dark. As soon as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw a man standing next to concrete pillar B17. He wore an old jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, and both hands tightly gripped a brown manila envelope. He asked, "Are you Tommy?" He looked up. I recognized him immediately. Tommy had been Michael's private driver for almost 4 years before suddenly quitting, claiming he had to go back to his hometown to care for his sick father. Back then, I even gave him a generous severance package because I thought he was honest and discreet. He nervously said yes. His voice was hoarse and shaking. I asked why he decided to find me now. Tommy looked around, then lowered his voice. He said he used to be terrified because he thought Mr. Carter had powerful backers, and he was just a driver. He said if he spoke out, he wouldn't just lose his job, his family would be in danger too. But over the last few days, hearing the rumors that Michael had been suspended, he felt that staying silent would be wronging me. I looked at the envelope in his hands. I asked what was inside. He handed it to me. Inside was an SD card, several photocopied receipts, vehicle logs, printed photos, and a small handwritten ledger. I flipped open the ledger. Dates, locations, hotels, restaurants, and luxury condos appeared line by line. On days Michael told me he was entertaining clients in New Jersey, the ledger showed Tommy driving him and Chloe to a resort in the Hamptons. On nights he claimed to be in late meetings with partners, Tommy documented dropping him off at Chloe's condo at 2 a.m. I clenched the ledger. This proved he was cheating, but I needed more. Tommy nodded and quickly pulled out a few photographs. He pointed to them. He said 3 years ago, Mr. Carter frequently visited a shady legal services office in Queens. Tommy said he overheard phone conversations. It sounded like they were drawing up fake documents. Then, one time, Michael got back in the car holding a large envelope. He told Miss Chloe on the phone that the divorce papers were finalized. They just needed to wait for the right moment. The blood in my veins ran cold. I asked if he saw what was in the envelope. Tommy said yes. One night, Michael was drunk and dropped the papers on the floor of the car. Tommy saw a photocopied divorce decree with my name and his on it, but the court seal looked completely fake. Tommy got scared, so he snapped a picture of it. He showed me the photo on his phone. It was slightly blurry, but clear enough to read my name, Michael's name, and see a forged red court stamp. I laughed, but my throat was bitterly dry. It turned out the so-called divorce wasn't just a lie he told his mistress. He had actually paid to forge court documents, attempting to use fake legality to erase me from his life. Tommy swallowed hard, then continued. He said there was one more thing, though he didn't know if it was important. About 6 months ago, Michael met multiple times with a man named Robert, the CEO of Apex Supplies. They talked in the back of the car, thinking Tommy couldn't hear. Michael told Robert that if the company ever got audited, they would just pin all the blame on the purchasing department and accounting. Michael also mentioned he had hidden a secondary set of clean, fabricated ledgers in a safe at his mother's house. I snapped my head up. A safe at Helen's house? Tommy said yes. The Greenwich estate. In the second-floor study, hidden behind a false wall panel behind the bookshelf. Tommy said he saw Michael open it once. A chill ran down my spine. I bought that house. The renovations were paid for with my money. And yet, behind those walls, he hid the dirty evidence he planned to use to frame innocent employees. I asked Tommy how he knew exactly where it was. Tommy looked down, wringing his hands. He confessed that Michael had ordered him to help carry the small steel safe into the house. Michael told him if anyone asked, to say it was just a strongbox for Helen's vintage jewelry. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I asked if he was willing to testify in federal court. Tommy went silent for a long time. I didn't push him. In the empty garage, the sound of water dripping from an overhead pipe onto the concrete echoed loudly. Finally, he nodded. He said yes, but only if I helped protect his family. He said Michael once threatened that if Tommy ever betrayed him, he'd make sure Tommy could never find work on the East Coast again. I looked him dead in the eye. I told him he gives me the truth, and I will protect him with the full force of the law. He exhaled heavily, as if a boulder had been lifted off his chest. I called Attorney Hayes, ordering him to come down to the garage immediately. But before I could say another word, my phone screen lit up. It was a text message from an unknown number, containing only a single photo. In the picture, the front door of my mother-in-law's estate was wide open. A man in a black baseball cap was walking out, clutching a small steel lockbox. Below the picture was a text. Too late. The evidence is being moved. I stared at the photo, my hands turning to ice. Michael had beaten me to the punch. I stared at the screen, a chill running down my spine. The man in the black cap carrying the steel box out of the Greenwich estate was clearly not a family member. If this text was real, Michael or his mother had ordered someone to move the evidence in the dead of night. If I was just a few minutes too late, the final pieces of proof could vanish forever. I immediately turned to Tommy. I showed him the picture and asked if he recognized the man. Tommy zoomed in on the photo, his face turning pale. He stammered that it looked like Robert, the CEO of Apex Supplies. Tommy had driven Michael to meet this man several times. I didn't need to hear anything else. I called Attorney Hayes. I told him to head straight to the Greenwich estate, bring a private investigator, and call the local Connecticut police for backup. Someone was moving evidence out of the house. David's voice instantly went taut. He told me not to go alone, assuring me he was on his way. I hung up, signaled my security detail to follow, and peeled out of the underground garage. It was late into the night, but New York traffic was still heavy. Red taillights, blaring horns, and glaring headlights flashed past my eyes like an endless nightmare. I drove so fast my hands cramped on the steering wheel. Only one thought echoed in my head. I could not let him wipe away his tracks. I could not let my 10 years end with the phrase insufficient evidence. When I arrived at the estate, the massive iron gates were slightly ajar. Michael's car was parked haphazardly in the driveway, the driver's side door still open. As I stepped out of the car, I heard Helen's voice shouting from inside the house. She yelled, "What are you standing there for? Take it and go. Don't let Anna find it." I shoved the front door open and stormed in. Helen was standing in the middle of the foyer, her hair a mess, still wearing the wrinkled silk loungewear from yesterday. Michael stood near the staircase, his face ashen. And the man named Robert had just come down from the second floor, clutching the small steel lockbox against his chest. All three of them froze in sheer panic when they saw me. I walked into the house step by step, my voice so cold it scared even me. I said, "It's awfully late for such a lively house party." Helen immediately stepped in front of Robert, blocking him. She demanded to know what I was doing here, screaming that this was her house. I looked at her. I told her I wasn't so sure it would be hers tomorrow. Michael rushed down the stairs, grabbing my arm to pull me outside. He begged me to listen, claiming things weren't what they looked like. He lied, saying Robert just came to pick up some old business documents. I violently yanked my arm away. Old business documents hidden in a wall safe? I asked him exactly how stupid he thought I was. His face hardened. Robert tried to back away toward the rear exit, but my security detail immediately blocked the door. Robert clutched the steel box tighter, sweat pouring down his temples. I held my hand out. I told him to give me the box. Robert looked at Michael. Michael gritted his teeth and ordered him not to hand it over. I pulled out my phone and started recording video. I stated loudly and clearly, "Fine. Everything said and done tonight goes straight to the FBI and federal prosecutors. Mr. Robert, you are holding documents related to the embezzlement of over $1.2 million from Parker Holdings. If you walk out that door with it, you are no longer just an accomplice. You are actively destroying federal evidence." Robert started to shake. Helen shrieked, accusing me of bluffing. She yelled that just because I had money didn't mean I could frame whoever I wanted. I stared at her unblinking. I told her she had been spending my money for 10 years without complaining, and now she dared to call it framing. She choked, unable to respond. Just then, the sound of screeching tires echoed from the driveway. Attorney Hayes walked in, flanked by 2 local Greenwich police officers and a private investigator. When Michael saw them, his face turned the color of death. He asked if I was really willing to go this far. I turned to him. I told him he was the one who taught me that when dealing with people who have no conscience, you have to use the law. Robert finally gave up. The steel box was placed on the coffee table. David drafted an incident report right on the spot in front of the police. When the box was pried open, it was filled with stacks of contracts, ledgers of illicit payouts, USB drives, and corporate seals for several shell companies. But as I dug down to the bottom compartment, my heart sank. That compartment was completely empty. The only thing left was a rectangular outline in the dust, showing where something highly important used to sit. Tommy, standing behind me, went pale. He whispered that it wasn't right. The last time he saw it, there was a thick red folder inside. I whipped my head around to look at Michael. He was looking down, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward into a tiny, mocking smile. It was fleeting, but it was enough for me to understand. He had swapped the contents before I arrived. I walked right up to his face, my voice dropping to a whisper. I demanded to know where the red folder was. He looked at me, a look of pure, unhinged desperation flashing in his eyes for the first time. He taunted me, asking if I wanted to know. He told me to get on my knees and beg him. I stared at the man who used to be my husband, suddenly feeling an eerie sense of calm. A rat backed into a corner will always try to use humiliation to grasp at whatever pathetic sliver of power it has left. I didn't answer him. I simply turned to Attorney Hayes and ordered him to pull the security camera footage. The front gate cameras, the street cameras. I wanted to know exactly where that red folder went. Michael let out a hoarse laugh. He said it was too late. He told me I might have won a few battles, but I hadn't won the war. I looked at him. I told him to keep playing then. But I warned him to remember one thing. Someone who has nothing left to believe in has absolutely nothing left to fear. I left the Greenwich estate at nearly 2 a.m. In the back seat of my car, the steel box was sealed in an evidence bag. But in my mind, all I could see was that empty bottom compartment and Michael's twisted smile. That red folder absolutely contained his most devastating trump card. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to use it to challenge me. David sat beside me, furiously making calls to trace the neighborhood cameras. I looked out the window, watching the trees blur into the darkness, feeling terrifyingly calm. In the past, if Michael had just spoken to me coldly, I would toss and turn all night wondering what I did wrong. Now he was hiding evidence and threatening me, and I felt no pain at all. When a woman's heart finally dies, what's left is not tears, but sheer, unadulterated clarity. David's phone buzzed. He answered it, and his expression changed drastically. He told me the estate's gate camera caught footage at 9:42 p.m. Helen Carter handed a thick red envelope to a middle-aged woman driving a rideshare vehicle. The license plate was partially obscured, but a neighbor's Ring camera caught a better angle. I turned to him, asking who the woman was. He said they were identifying her, but there was a bizarre detail. After the woman left, Michael was the one who called Robert to come pick up the lockbox. It seemed the steel box was just a decoy. I closed my eyes. Michael still had half a brain left. He knew I would track down the safe, so he intentionally let me catch a piece of the evidence. The most critical item was moved out first. But who was that middle-aged woman? A relative? A former employee? Or another link in their syndicate? Just as I was about to ask, my phone lit up. It was a text from Helen Carter. It read, "If you want to protect your mother's legacy, back off." I stared at those words, my hand freezing. My mother. My mother passed away 7 years ago. She was a kind, hard-working woman who spent her life running a small textile shop in Brooklyn, saving every dime to put me through college. She never fought with anyone. Why was Helen bringing up my mother now? I called her immediately. She answered after a few rings, her voice raspy but full of malice. She sneered, asking if I finally knew what fear felt like. I gripped the phone, demanding to know what she was holding. Helen laughed wickedly. She said she was holding the truth. She asked if I thought my mother was so perfectly clean. She claimed that the Brooklyn house I sold to start my company had a disputed title. She threatened that if the truth got out, not only would my mother's reputation be ruined, but the founding capital of Parker Holdings would be federally investigated. My blood turned to ice. That house was the only thing my mother left me before she died. She signed the deed over to me, and I sold it to get my startup capital. Everything was done through a legitimate notary. I never suspected a thing. I told her she was lying. She told me to ask my lawyers if I didn't believe her. She gloated that the red folder was currently safe in the hands of her operative. She warned that if I kept pushing her and her son, tomorrow morning the entire financial world would read that chairwoman Anna Parker built her empire on stolen, disputed property. I could clearly hear Michael's frantic voice in the background, yelling at his mother to stop talking. Helen screamed back, telling him to shut up. She yelled that if I wanted to drive them to their deaths, she was going to drag me down to hell with them. The call disconnected. I sat paralyzed for a few seconds. A completely different kind of pain surged in my chest, not because of Michael, but because of my mother. I could endure them smearing my name, but I absolutely would not let them drag my mother's memory through the mud. Attorney Hayes looked at me with deep concern. He warned me not to blindly believe her, stating the documents were highly likely forged. But he added that if they dared to use it as blackmail, they must have prepared it very meticulously. He offered to pull the property records from 10 years ago. I shook my head. I told him not just the property records. I wanted him to track down the notary, the city deed registry, and anyone whose name was ever attached to the history of that house. I wanted to know what they dug up and exactly which parts they forged. Just as the car pulled up in front of the Parker Holdings headquarters, David's assistant sent over a video clip from the neighbor's Ring camera. The woman who received the red envelope had pulled down her mask for just a few seconds to adjust her helmet. I zoomed in on the screen and my heart stopped. That face. It was Martha, my mother's former live-in caregiver and maid who quit the year I got married. On the day my mother died, she was the first one to clean out the old house. My hands went completely cold. If Martha was involved in this, it meant the Carter family's conspiracy started a very, very long time ago, long before I ever caught Michael cheating. I looked at David and ordered him to find Martha tonight, before she had the chance to vanish. David's team tracked down Martha's last known address in a rundown apartment complex in Queens. But when we got there, the door was padlocked. A neighbor told us she had left less than an hour ago, carrying a large duffel bag, and caught an Uber toward the Port Authority bus terminal. I stood in the damp, dingy hallway, looking at the fresh padlock on the rusted door, my heart growing colder by the second. An old maid vanishing at the exact moment a highly sensitive blackmail folder was moved. If anyone called this a coincidence, even a child wouldn't believe them. Attorney Hayes turned to me, suggesting she might be trying to flee out of state. He offered to have his contacts check the bus manifests heading south or into the Midwest. I shook my head. I said no. She isn't stupid enough to go straight to a bus terminal if she's holding highly sensitive documents. She would find somewhere she thought was a safe haven first. I quickly dug through my fragmented memories of Martha. Back when my mother was alive, Martha worked as a part-time caregiver, cooking, cleaning, and sometimes staying over when my mother's arthritis flared up. She was quiet, gaunt, and always kept her head down. My mother pitied her and even lent her money to pay for her son's medical bills. After my mother's funeral, she abruptly quit, saying she needed to move back to her hometown to care for her grandson. I was too drowned in grief at the time to question it. Thinking back now, her resignation was far too perfectly timed, almost as if she had just completed a specific task. I suddenly remembered a place. Street Jude's Parish in the Bronx. David looked at me, confused. I explained that when my mother was alive, she volunteered at the food pantry at Street Jude's every month. Martha had accompanied her many times. The parish had a small convent and shelter attached to it. If she was terrified, she might try to hide there. Less than 40 minutes later, our car pulled up to the church. It was nearing dawn, and a thin mist covered the old stone roof. The faint sound of morning bells echoed softly in the air. I walked into the courtyard, my heart heavy as lead. An elderly nun recognized me after I mentioned my mother's name. In silence, she led us to a row of small guest quarters in the back. The door to one of the small rooms was cracked open. Inside, I could hear muffled crying. I pushed the door open and stepped in. Martha was sitting on a wooden cot, clutching her duffel bag to her chest. As soon as she saw me, she panicked and jumped to her feet, all the blood draining from her face. She begged me not to hurt her, swearing she didn't know anything. I looked at the bag in her arms. I asked her if she didn't know anything. Why was she running? She hugged the bag tighter, her eyes completely bloodshot. She cried that she was forced into it. She said Helen Carter threatened her. If she didn't help, Helen would hire debt collectors to demand the money my mother lent her years ago and report her son to the police for an illegal gambling ring. Martha sobbed that she was old and just wanted to be left in peace. I stepped closer, my voice trembling as I tried to suppress my fury. I demanded to know where the red folder was. Martha broke down into loud sobs, collapsing onto her knees on the tile floor. She apologized profusely, saying she wronged my mother, but she swore the documents in the folder weren't completely real. She confessed that they forced her to sign an affidavit claiming my mother swindled a relative to get the deed to the Brooklyn house, and that I used that stolen house to build my company. But she swore it wasn't true. My mother never scammed anyone. The house was legitimately left to my mother by my grandmother. My throat tightened. I asked her why she signed it then. Shaking violently, she opened the duffel bag and pulled out the thick red folder. Inside was the written affidavit, several photocopied old property deeds, a USB drive containing an audio recording, and a promissory note bearing her signature. She confessed they had secretly recorded her lying. They told her that if she didn't cooperate, they would release the tape. She was so terrified that she took Helen's hush money, but last night, as she was running away with the folder, she kept thinking about my mother. She remembered that my mother had practically saved her son's life. She couldn't bear to let them ruin a dead woman's name. I took the red folder, my hands shaking. The forged documents inside were incredibly sophisticated, a mix of half-truths and complete lies. They wouldn't hold up in a rigorous federal court investigation, but they were more than enough to destroy my mother's reputation in the press, cast severe doubt on Parker Holdings, and drag me down into the mud with Michael. I looked at Martha. I asked her if she was willing to testify to this. She kept her head bowed, sobbing hysterically. She said she would do it, but begged me to protect her family. I turned to Attorney Hayes. I ordered him to draft a statement immediately, record her confession on video, and seal the entire folder. I told him we were submitting supplementary federal charges this morning, but right at that moment my phone rang. It was Michael. I put it on speaker. His voice echoed out, hoarse and freezing cold. He asked if I found Martha. He mockingly asked if I thought this meant I won. He stated he was currently at the Wall Street office. He told me that if I wasn't there in exactly 30 minutes, he was going to blow Parker Holdings straight to hell, literally. I froze. From the other end of the line, the ear-piercing shriek of a commercial fire alarm began blaring. I sprinted out of St. Jude's Parish before the sun had fully risen. The morning church bells faded behind me, but inside my head, the only sound was the blaring, chaotic fire alarm screaming from Michael's phone call. Attorney Hayes immediately called building security and dialed 911. I sat in the car, my heart pounding so hard I felt it might shatter my ribs. Even though I hated Michael Carter down to my very bones, I knew one thing. Parker Holdings wasn't just my company. It contained hundreds of employees, client data, project blueprints, and the livelihoods of innocent people. If he was truly unhinged enough to drag everyone down with him, I would never forgive myself for arriving too late. As the car swung onto Wall Street, I could already see the flashing lights of FDNY fire trucks and NYPD cruisers strobing against the glass facade of the building. Security guards were evacuating the night shift staff out onto the pavement. Some people were clutching laptops. Others in cleaning uniforms stood shivering on the sidewalk. I threw the car door open and stepped out. The freezing morning wind slapped my face. The head of security ran toward me, his face ash white. He reported that the fire suppression systems were triggered on the 26th floor, but there was no sign of a massive blaze yet. He said Mr. Carter was barricaded inside the CEO's office. I clenched my fists and asked if anyone was trapped. He said no. The floor was fully evacuated, but he added that Michael refused to let anyone in. He demanded to see only me. David grabbed my arm. He warned me not to go up there alone and to let the NYPD handle it. I looked up at the high floor that used to be Michael's domain. That office had witnessed the day we toasted champagne to our first big contract. It was also the place I caught him with Chloe. I knew he hadn't summoned me here to negotiate. He wanted me to witness his final, pathetic downfall. He wanted to drag me into the madness he had created. I told David I was going up, but not alone. 2 NYPD officers escorted me into the secured emergency elevator. Attorney Hayes followed closely, his phone already recording audio. As the elevator climbed higher, the blaring sirens grew deafening. When the doors opened on the 26th floor, the hallway was flashing with red strobe lights. A faint smell of smoke hung in the air, unclear if it was from electrical wires or something intentionally burned. The heavy oak doors to the CEO's office were locked tight. From inside, I heard Michael's raspy laughter. He yelled out, asking if Anna had arrived. I stood before the door and calmly replied, "I'm here. Open the door." An NYPD officer signaled me to step back and shouted, "Michael Carter, open the door and cooperate. Any action endangering others will result in severe federal charges." Total silence fell inside for a few seconds. Then came the sound of shattering glass. Michael screamed back, "Federal charges? You're only here because she has money. Everyone takes her side." I closed my eyes, took a breath, and opened them. I spoke clearly. "Michael, you wanted to see me, so open the door. If you have a shred of manhood left in you, stop hiding behind a locked piece of wood." That sentence seemed to strike the absolute last nerve of his bruised ego. The deadbolt clicked open. The police instantly pushed forward, securing a tactical advantage. I stepped in behind them. The CEO's office was an absolute disaster. Documents were scattered everywhere like snow. A corner of the expensive window drapes was scorched black, and a fire extinguisher lay discarded on the floor. Michael stood near his desk. His dress shirt was wrinkled and filthy, his eyes bloodshot. In his hand, he held a USB drive and several crumpled pieces of paper. On the desk, the framed photo commemorating the company's 10-year anniversary was smashed to pieces. The cracked glass cut right across my smiling face in the picture. He looked at me and started to laugh. He said, "You won, Anna. You took back the company, the houses, the money. What else do you want?" I stared at him for a long time. I said I wanted him to pay for what he had done. He shook his head, his laughter growing louder. He said, "No, you want me on my knees. You want me to admit you beat me. But do you even know why I betrayed you?" He sneered. "Because next to you, I never felt like a man. You're too smart, too cold, too untouchable. I stood in your shadow for 10 years, feeling like a ghost." A sharp pain shot through my chest, but not out of love. It was because, even at the very end, he still managed to twist his own pathetic inferiority complex into being my fault. I never asked him to be a ghost. He chose to hide in the shadows. His face contorted. He held up the USB drive. He yelled that this held the backup ledgers, threatening that if he lost everything, I wouldn't know peace either. I looked at him, my voice completely deadpan. I told him Martha had already confessed. The red folder was in my lawyer's hands. Chloe handed over every email. Tommy was ready to testify under oath, and Robert was intercepted at the Greenwich estate. I told him he was out of cards. The crazed light in his eyes shattered. The manic energy drained from his face, leaving behind an incredibly pathetic, hollow shell. He took a step back, his shoulders collapsing. He muttered that it was impossible, that Chloe wouldn't betray him. I told him he betrayed everyone else first. He stared at me, his lips trembling. He asked, "Anna, if I go to federal prison, how will my mother survive?" I felt my heart turn to absolute stone. I asked him, "When your mother was preparing to smear the name of my dead mother, did she ever wonder how I would survive?" That single sentence struck him dumb. The police moved in and restrained him. He didn't fight back. When the USB dropped from his hand, the tiny click of plastic hitting the floor was almost swallowed by the blaring fire alarms. But to me, it was the final death knell of a kingdom built on lies. As he was being escorted past me, he suddenly stopped. In a broken, hoarse whisper, he asked, "Did you ever truly love me?" I looked at the man who had destroyed 10 years of my life and answered very softly, "I did. And it is exactly because I truly loved you that the pain today makes it impossible for me to ever forgive you." He lowered his head and was pushed into the elevator. The fire alarms finally ceased. The entire 26th floor sank into a heavy, suffocating silence. I walked into the ruined office and picked up the shattered picture frame. In the photo, the Anna of 10 years ago was smiling radiantly, standing next to the husband she believed was her forever. I placed it face down on the desk and walked out. Outside the glass windows, the Manhattan dawn was just breaking. It was pale, but undeniably clear. A long, dark night had ended. But the true trial for the Carter family had only just begun. 3 months after the day Michael was hauled out of the 26th floor in handcuffs, the federal indictments came down. The inflated supply contracts, the illicit money flowing through Apex Supplies, the 2 retail storefronts in Manhattan under Helen's name, Chloe's luxury condo in Tribeca, and the blackmail conspiracy involving my late mother's Brooklyn home were all formally entered into federal evidence. I always thought that seeing him stand in front of a judge would make my heart feel lighter, but no. On the day the trial began, I sat in the gallery reserved for the victims, looking at Michael in his faded prison-issue jumpsuit, his hair buzzed short, his face hollowed out. I only felt a freezing, empty void in my chest. That man used to be my entire world. Now he was just an incredibly expensive lesson. He turned around and looked at me. His eyes no longer held the manic desperation from that morning in the office. There was only pure exhaustion and absolute hopelessness. He whispered my name. I looked at him with serene detachment and told him never to call me that again. He lowered his head. Helen sat in the row behind him, crying until her voice gave out. She no longer wore her pearl necklaces or expensive silk blouses. She no longer possessed the haughty arrogance of the mother-in-law who once pointed her finger in my face and cursed my infertility. The 2 Manhattan storefronts were seized by the feds. The Greenwich estate was repossessed under our legal agreement. Her trust accounts were frozen to aid the federal investigation into the laundered money. For the first time in her life, she understood the sheer terror of losing things she believed were permanently hers. Chloe testified against them. She wore a simple white blouse, no makeup, her eyes swollen shut. She admitted to receiving the money, the condo, and keeping the emails and recordings out of fear that Michael would abandon her. When the federal prosecutor asked her if she knew the funds were tied to corporate embezzlement, she fell silent for a long time before breaking down into tears. She confessed she knew, but she said she was greedy. She thought that as long as she was loved, that was enough, and eventually, she would get to keep it all. I listened to her without feeling any anger. People usually don't fall because of a single moment of weakness. They fall because they close their eyes and keep walking even after they see the cliff. The trial lasted for days. Michael was convicted of federal wire fraud, embezzlement, destruction of evidence, and forgery. Robert from Apex Supplies was also sentenced. Helen was indicted as an accessory for receiving and concealing stolen assets. As for me, after it was all said and done, I signed the divorce papers on a rainy, quiet afternoon. The paper was so thin, yet it cost me 10 years, a child that never got the chance to be born, and countless sleepless nights of self-blame to finally sign it without my hand shaking. Attorney Hayes sat across from me and softly said, "It's done, Miss Parker." I looked out the window. The rain traced long, blurry streaks across the glass. "Yes, it's done," I replied. But deep down, I knew my life wasn't defined by a finalized divorce decree. Parker Holdings, after enduring a painful purge, gradually stabilized. I overhauled the financial department, appointed a new executive team, ordered transparent public audits, and restored integrity to the company. The employees who had been terrified and confused began returning to work with genuine trust in their eyes. One morning, as I walked into the lobby, the receptionist bowed her head slightly. "Good morning, Miss Parker." Not Mrs. Carter, just Anna Parker. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt that my name was enough. On the anniversary of my mother's passing, I brought a bouquet of white lilies to Greenwood Cemetery. I knelt in front of her grave and placed my hand against the cold headstone. "Mom, I'm sorry. I let them use your love for me to threaten me. But I took it all back. Your legacy, your honor, and my own life, I got it all back." The wind rustled through the pine trees, brushing against my hair like a gentle hand. I didn't cry. Or perhaps my tears had dried up a long time ago. All that remained was a profoundly deep sense of peace. On the drive back, I passed the Parker Holdings building. The late afternoon sun hit the corporate logo, making it gleam like a scar finally healing over. I stood in the lobby and took a slow, deep breath. 10 years ago, I built this place out of love. 10 years later, I kept it for myself. That night, I received a text from Attorney Hayes. The court had handed down a heavy federal sentence for Michael. David asked if I wanted to pursue a separate civil suit for further damages. I stared at the text for a long time before replying. "Just follow the law. I don't need any more revenge. I only wanted justice." I put my phone down and opened the balcony doors. New York City at night was still loud, still shining, and still entirely indifferent to the suffering of any one individual. But that very indifference reminded me that life always moves forward. Those who betray will pay the price, and those who are broken must learn to live again. Not to prove their strength to anyone else, but to never betray themselves again. The story and characters above are my own creation. It is not a true story. The MC of the above story is an AI voice. This is my personal reflection after this story. I hope that after listening, you will understand that living with kindness is a precious thing, but being kind does not mean allowing others to trample over you. In a family, a husband and wife need respect, loyalty, and gratitude for each other's sacrifices. When a crisis hits, stay calm and do not destroy yourself over the mistakes of others. Keep your legal documents clear and protect your rightful assets. Live with an open heart, but strictly enforce your boundaries. Those who do wrong will eventually pay the price. And those who know how to stand back up after the worst pain will absolutely find peace, joy, and happiness in their lives once again.